I am maintaining my childhood curiosity. I was born on a farm, and I'm still a curious farm boy trying to figure out the world. And I don't care how many likes I get on social media. In fact, I have no footprint there. My goal is to figure out whether we have a neighbor, a cosmic neighbor. And one way to figure it out is by searching our backyard for objects. If we find a tennis ball thrown by a neighbor, we know the neighbor plays tennis. If we realize that we are not alone, we might go out and meet the neighbor. And these are very important implications for the future of humanity. And rather than surrendering to prejudice or to opinions that many people have on the subject, I want to seek the evidence. And, that's a traditional approach that was pioneered actually by Nicolaus Copernicus. A couple of months ago, the Polish government invited me to give a keynote speech to celebrate the 550th year anniversary for his birth. And he realized, by the way, he was not as controversial as Galileo because he was a priest, and he wanted to help the church. The church had a problem. They could not figure out when Easter takes place. They always got it wrong by a few days because they had the earth at the center of the world. And Copernicus realized that if he puts the sun in the middle of the solar system, he can figure out Easter correctly. So he offered them this model, and they said, thank you very much. It really works, and we will adapt it. But they banned his book until the 19th century. It was a forbidden book. And he pioneered the method of science, whereby, it doesn't really matter what your prior ideas are, but if the data shows you something else, that's the best way to gain new knowledge. So I'm seeking evidence. We've been, as you said, we've been looking for radio signals for 70 years. And this is just like waiting for a phone call at home. Nobody may call you because they don't realize that you're lonely, or they may be addicted to digital screens the way we are. And so,
well, can I ask you this, Professor? That's one thing about SETI. I'm inviting you to be controversial here. It's never made a lot of sense to me that aliens, if they are as advanced as we suspect they are, if aliens are an advanced, highly advanced future technology that we don't know about yet, what is the likelihood that they would be using something as banal as radio waves? It's an almost impossible idea, isn't it?
Well, it makes little sense because it also exposes their existence to the outside. And if they want to survive a long period of time, they would rather hide themselves or develop other means of communication. And actually, we produced the strongest radio signals around after the Second World War, when the US had a system for finding ballistic missiles using very powerful radars. And since then, we are communicating in very different ways, not using radio waves. It's actually a bad approach to prepare for a neighbor by imagining that the neighbor is just like you, because we can do that if we know that the neighbor has the same DNA as we have. But if it belongs to a different star, all bets are off. It could be something far more advanced than us, because we had a century of science and technology, and that's just one part in 100 million of the age of the universe. And if they had 1,000 years, just imagine ourselves 1,000 years from now, it would look like magic or miracles to us, what we are capable of doing in 1,000 years. And so we should just be agnostic and search. And I think it's most likely for us to find space trash, things that were thrown out of other planets that arrived to our neighborhood simply because it takes less than 1 billion years, even for our own rockets, to traverse the Milky Way from one side to the other. And by the way, Elon Musk used his Tesla Roadster car as a dummy payload on the Falcon Heavy launch in 2018. And within 20 million years, it might crash onto Earth. We cannot see it with our best telescopes because it's too small to reflect enough sunlight for us to see. But the point is that my colleagues would argue, it's a rock of a type that we've never seen before. I say, maybe Elon Musk is not the most accomplished entrepreneur in space since the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago. Let's allow for the possibility that there are all kinds of technological gadgets floating in interstellar space, and every now and then one of them comes close to Earth, and we can see it.
So can I pin you down, Professor, on why you are so interested in the subject of extraterrestrial, non-human intelligent life? Is it something you've had an experience with? Have you had any kind of an encounter? Have you seen anything anomalous?
No, I am interested in it because, first of all, I was intrigued by the fact that only over the past decade, we found objects from outside the solar system in astronomy. The first one reported in October 2017. And that intrigued me because I wrote a paper a decade earlier forecasting no such rocks from other stars detected by this telescope in Hawaii. It just didn't have the sensitivity. And then, based on what we know about the solar system, it was really surprising that it noticed a rock or an object that came from outside the solar system. And this object actually looked very different than the asteroids or comets that we are familiar with. It had a very extreme shape. It was given the name Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. And also it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without evaporating, without showing any cometary tail of gas or dust. And to me, it illustrated the possibility that we might be surprised by what visits us. And that may be space trash. The evidence we collected cannot tell us whether it's artificial or natural, but it's quite possible that it's actually artificial based on its weirdness. And then I discovered with my student that there was an earlier object 4 years before that, the size of a watermelon, that collided with Earth, and the fireball that it generated as a result of its friction on air was detected by US government satellites. And it was moving faster than the escape speed from the solar system. In fact, it was moving faster than 95% of the stars in the vicinity of the sun. And moreover, it exploded only in the lower atmosphere, implying that its material strength was higher than even iron meteorites. So I decided to lead an expedition. After the US Space Command confirmed the data, they looked back at the data and wrote an official letter to NASA when I reached out to them through the White House. And so that confirmation led me to establish an expedition at a cost of $1.5 million with a team of 30 people. We went to the Pacific Ocean, to the location, the site of this meteor, and we collected materials from the ocean floor at a depth of about 2 kilometers across a region of 10 kilometers in size that was localized as the fireball site by the Department of Defense. And over the past 9 months, we analyzed those materials. We found that 10% of the droplets, the molten droplets that we found on the ocean floor, have composition that does not resemble materials from the solar system. It was never reported in the scientific literature. And so we had to give it a new name. And we are planning to go back and search for bigger pieces. The ones that we identified were less than a millimeter in size. We want to find maybe even the core of the object, because that would tell us whether it's a technological gadget or a rock.
Can I just go through this very slowly with you, Professor, because I'm fascinated by this case. Firstly, you've copped some very strong Galileo-like criticism for daring to suggest that this interstellar object might in fact have been some kind of technological artifact. Just explain to me, why do you believe, what's the evidence to show that this object, whatever it was that hit the ocean, is the object that came from space? Because I know some people have suggested that the seismic data that you relied on in some cases was inaccurate and it was possibly just a rolling truck or something. But the most important thing is, what is it about the constituents of those spherules that you found that makes you think that it is perhaps, well, let's be blunt about it, a melted spacecraft of some kind?
Well, so first, the location. We based the search on the Department of Defense data. It came from sensors on board the US government satellites that detected the fireball, the light from the explosion. And we went back and forth across this region of 10 kilometers in size 26 times. Now, just before we went there, we looked at some data from seismometers in the area that we found only one seismometer that actually had a signal at the time of the explosion, but it was not used to guide us because we searched the entire area defined by the US Space Command. And then recently, some scientists said, oh, we don't believe the seismometer data was a meteor, maybe it was a truck, but they ignored the US government data that guided us in the first place. And that
well,
was really...
Can I quickly pick you up on that? Because I'm fascinated by the fact that you have been given, a scientist working at Harvard's illustrious Harvard University has been given access to defense data from super, super secret satellites that I know have downlinks here over Australia. And I have sources here in Australia who've told me that they've seen some of this data and that it's quite extraordinary what we can see in outer space. Let's just ask a theoretical question here, sir. Based on the knowledge that you have from what you've seen of the DoD data, without telling me anything about its capabilities, let's protect the secrets of the United States. Do you think the United States government would be aware if alien spacecraft were entering and exiting Earth's atmosphere with the technology that you've been apprised of?
Yes, I would think so. If we are dealing with objects that produce a fireball, definitely, because the sensors that the US government is using are designed within a fraction of a second to detect the launch of ballistic missiles from the heat that they generate. And then they report to the US president about those because it could be a national security risk. And now, this agency, the US Space Command, is funded at $30 billion a year, more than the budget of NASA. And they come out with an official letter to NASA confirming that this meteor was interstellar in origin. Now, a year later, astronomers write and publish a paper in the Astrophysical Journal saying, we don't believe this agency. So not only are they saying that taxpayers' money is being wasted, I mean, they should also lose sleep at night because, if a ballistic missile was heading towards Washington, D.C., and this agency is unable to figure out the speed of the ballistic missile by a factor of 3, as they are arguing about this meteor not being interstellar, that there was a mistake by a factor of 3, and they would report to the US president that ballistic missile is going towards Mexico instead of Washington, D.C. That's a serious matter. And they published this claim in the Astrophysical Journal. So I say, this is not serious. This is a childish behavior of them to dismiss data that was double-checked by the US government. I go there, and then I find materials. And now they say, oh, these materials might be coal ash. And so we checked 55 elements from the periodic table, and we verified that it's not coal ash. And what I'm trying to say is that some of these scientists keep looking for reasons to dismiss this study, which is, just the way science is done. It took a lot of work to design this expedition, go there, collect the materials, and then analyze them for 9 months. These people are just like critics. They look around, they don't do anything. They just try to criticize and bring enough dust up in the air so that they can claim they can't see anything. And I see that as an attempt that is anti-science, actually, rather than what they claim to do. They claim to protect science. In fact, they are damaging science because science should be based on evidence, and we should not have a prejudice. And the only way to learn something new is to collect the data and the evidence through hard work, which is what I'm doing.
Now, sir, I spoke to a few of your colleagues in astrophysics and asked them about you before we did this interview. And one of them chuckled wryly when I asked him about Professor Avi Loeb. And I said, give me a word that describes him. And he said, I can't give you one word, I can give you three. Dogged, courageous, and contrarian. And I respect that. I think for somebody doing the work that you're doing, especially making an inquiry into essentially the idea of non-human intelligent life, you have to be those three things, don't you? You're going against the scientific establishment, very much like Galileo did 400 plus years ago.
Yeah, so every morning I jog at sunrise. I do it on land, and I did it also on the ship that we had in the Pacific Ocean that was fittingly called Silver Star. It was an Australian ship. And one morning we had a Netflix team that is making a documentary about my research. One morning they decided to join me at sunrise, and they asked me to jog 3 times the usual amount of time that I jog. It was about 10 miles or 15 kilometers. Then the director asked me, Avi, it looks like you're running. Are you running away from something or towards something? And I said both. I'm running away from some of my colleagues who have strong opinions without seeking evidence. And I'm running towards a higher intelligence in interstellar space. And you know,
well, can I ask you this? Can I ask you this, sir? You believe fundamentally the implication behind your research is that you believe the evidence on UFOs, UAPs is now sufficiently there prima facie. You know, there's enough on the facts to suggest there might be something there. What is your view about the likelihood that this planet has been visited by non-human intelligences?
You see, this is a path that was not taken by scientists. And when you take a new path, there is a chance that you will find low-hanging fruits. And if you think about new data that we will get, in a year, there will be the Rubin Observatory in Chile. It has a camera that was just constructed the size of a person with 3.2 billion pixels, 1,000 times more pixels than your cell phone camera. And it will survey the southern sky every 4 days. And based on my calculations, it has a chance of seeing an Oumuamua-like object every month or every couple of months. So there will be many more. We will not be in the dark. And among rocks that we might find from interstellar space, you know, we might also see a technological gadget. And that's the way to find it. And we are developing with my postdoctoral fellow at Harvard, the Richard Cloet, we are developing the tools that will allow us to identify interstellar objects from the data stream coming from the Rubin Observatory. In addition, I'm planning to go back to the Pacific Ocean and visit also the site we've been to look for bigger pieces, but have a second expedition in the future to look for another interstellar meteor. Altogether, my hope is that it will become obvious once we find the data and the evidence, and it will be available to the public. You know, we can wait for the US government to tell us what they know, but it may be just like waiting for Godot, because first of all, they're not scientists. They are worried about national security. They have a different day job. My day job is to figure out what lies outside the solar system. And since they're not giving me any data, I will get the data myself, because the sky is not classified, the oceans are not classified, and we have the freedom of studying these media to figure out if we are alone or not. We shouldn't rely on the US government to tell us whether we are alone.
Now, one of the things I read was your paper, your preliminary paper on the so-called spherules that you recovered from the ocean. And they apparently contained an abundance of beryllium, lanthanum, and uranium, described as a never-seen-before BLAU composition. And they also exhibited iron isotopic ratios unlike those found on Earth. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so what we did is look at 60 elements from the periodic table and measure the abundances of those elements in the unique type of spherules that were only found around the meteor site. And we realized that some elements have an abundance that is up to 1,000 times bigger than in solar system materials. And there are many such elements, but the most prominent ones are the ones you mentioned: beryllium, lanthanum, uranium, and we called it Belau composition because there was no name for it in the scientific literature. And it's possible that this composition is originated from a natural source. And just to give you an example, if you take a planet like the Earth and bring it close to the most common type of star, a dwarf star that has 1/10 of the mass of the sun, the planet will be melted and also spaghettified into a stream of debris, half of which will be ejected to interstellar space at the speeds that resemble that of this meteor. And since you melt the rock, you could get differentiation. Some elements will be left and others will be removed from those rocks that go to interstellar space. And so that's a natural mechanism of reaching those unusual abundance patterns. And I wrote about it in a paper, but obviously until we find bigger pieces, we will not know what the origin is. And I should say, if we find a technological gadget and it has buttons on it, the question is, should we press a button?
Well, I'd be pressing it, sir, just to find out what happens next. One of the things that really does strike me, though, about the response to your spherals investigation is the antagonism, the hostility, and the ridicule that's been directed at you by people on no solid basis, because a lot was made of this seismic claim. The claim was that you'd simply tried to find these spherals in an area based on seismic data, which, as I understand it from my reading, is not true. And yet, what really shocked me was the New York Times, one of the most eminent newspapers in the world. It abandoned any pretense at objectivity when it did a story about your case. And it asked a very mocking question of a guy called Benjamin Fernando, a planetary seismologist at Johns Hopkins University, who pushed this idea that you just picked up data from a passing truck. And the New York Times said, "How did you conclude that we're not being invaded by aliens?" Now, frankly, Professor, you're a very polite, genteel chap, and I'm going to say it for you. That was just a piss take. It was an attempt by a newspaper to take the mickey out of you and mock you and ridicule you. How do you feel about that? How do you respond to something like that?
Well, first of all, I should say the New York Times Magazine had a large feature article about my research just half a year earlier. And so they're seeking clickbaits. And, some of their reporters are very superficial. And, that's the nature of journalism these days. And we should just... rather than mud wrestle with those who are superficial. I mean, I don't want to get dirty. My approach is very different. An eagle very often has a crow pecking on its neck. And you might suspect that the eagle would try to fight the crow off the back of its back. But instead, the eagle rises to greater heights where the oxygen level is low and the crow drops off the eagle's back. And that is the approach that I prefer to take after being bruised in interactions that I had previously. And so I just ignore those people who do not make sense. Many of them are really second-level scientists. Some of them are not even scientists. They are just bloggers who did not publish even a single scientific paper over the past year. So I asked, if you have a person looking at a soccer match and making comments and telling the players how to pass the ball without actually being on the field, why should we listen to that person? How dare he say that? I'm a player, I'm writing scientific papers every month, several of them. I'm really on the field, and it takes a lot of effort to do the scientific work. I just don't want to be distracted. And so my approach is to ignore those low-level critics and move on, because eventually, once we have solid evidence, nobody could ignore it. By now, we realize that we are not at the center of the world, and that happens to, even though it is a blow to our ego, it happens to be very useful. If you want to get to Mars, you better not believe that Mars orbits the Earth. Okay. And so knowing what Galileo and Copernicus said helps us cope with reality. And if we realize that we have a neighbor, it would have huge implications for our future, both in terms of religious beliefs that people have and in terms of what we aspire to do.
Now, sir, one of the stories I am fascinated by, and I've spent a lot of time trying to track him down and chase down this story, and I don't know if you're going to tell me about this, but I know you know about this because I have my sources in Israel who tell me you've also been trying to contact him, is the story of Haim Eshed, an Israeli professor of aeronautics and astronautics, a retired brigadier general in Israeli military intelligence. He was the director of space programs for the Israeli Defense Department for 30 years, chair of its space committee, the father of Israel's space program. And in an extraordinary interview in December 2020, Haim Eshed claimed that the government of the United States had been in contact with ET life for years, and that it had signed secret agreements with a galactic federation to do experiments on Earth. He even claimed there was a joint base underground on Mars where aliens collaborate with US astronauts. Now, he claimed President Trump was told about this, but was stopped from revealing it because of fears of mass hysteria. Now, it's too easy to dismiss this chap as somebody who's mentally ill or aged and infirm, because I'm told he's not. I'm told he's still got his marbles, that Haim Eshed is a very, very astute, very clever, and extremely well-respected man. And in fact, another chap called Isaac Ben Israel, the chairman of the Israel Space Agency, whom I know you know, he has also said that whilst Eshed went too far with his claims, he vouched for Haim Eshed's seriousness, sincerity, and standing in the field. Now, I apologize for that ridiculously long question, but there are millions of people watching you right now, Professor. Tell me, what do you think of Haim Eshed's theory, the suggestion that we are already in touch with ETs?
Well, his remarks echo what we heard from David Grush. And, in December 2023, just 5 months ago, I spoke with David Grush and I asked him for details, clear evidence to substantiate what he is talking about. He said that he cannot provide it because of legal issues. But he himself, talked about things that resemble what Haim Eshed talked about. Around the same time, I was also visiting CERN, and interestingly, the host showed me the book by Eshed. Now, Eshed gave all this information in a magazine interview to a journalist, but he did not include the details in his book. And so the host was asking me to translate from Hebrew to English. And when I looked at the book, I realized that Eshed is speaking about me. And he was talking about Oumuamua. I've never had a discussion with him, but I know that he was well aware of what I'm doing and appreciating the science that I'm doing. And as you said, I don't think he went crazy. I do think that people regard him very highly when and still are. And so it's interesting, maybe there is some fire behind the smoke. I mean, we hear from different people. Now, within government, within the US government, there might be different sections, some of which are not aware of what's going on in others. And that may explain why the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office insists that there is nothing really extraterrestrial in what they are doing. So, we can wait for the evidence to come out or for more people to eventually reveal it. I had a visitor from Lockheed Martin, someone that used to play an important role there at my home. And I said, do you believe or do you think that there is any substance behind David Grush's claim may be a corporation like Lockheed Martin has some materials, maybe the government gave it. And I expected him to dismiss it up front, but instead he said, I don't think it's necessarily wrong. And so it might well be that the materials are not held by the Pentagon, by the Department of Defense, but they were given to corporations. And in that case, the corporations would develop a relationship very similar to a patient-psychiatrist relation. A psychiatrist never solves the problem of the patient because, they get paid for addressing them. And so, the corporations are not following a scientific narrative. They are not trying to inform humanity of astronomical realizations. And so as a result, they never resolve the issue. They never tell the US government the full story. And they don't have necessarily the best scientists. So the only way forward is either to get to the source within government, or to actually collect the information ourselves rather than wait for them. And I take the second.
Can I just interrupt there for a moment, Professor? I just wanted to pin you down. I was told that you tried to meet Haim Eshed.
Right.
Did you try?
I tried to meet him, but didn't. In the last visit that I had to Israel, it didn't work out. So maybe next time.
Can I ask you this? Have you spoken to any people in Israel about Haim Eshed's claims?
Yeah,
I think his claims are extraordinarily significant, and I have sources in both Israel and America who've told me that Haim Eshed is an incredible figure in the Israel space program. People speak about him with awe. And as one person said to me, if Haim Eshed says that, I'm taking it seriously. Are you?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I talked with people who know him well, and they have a great respect to what he says. And so the only issue I have is that I haven't seen the evidence. He was talking about things, but, it's really difficult to embrace an opinion without seeing the evidence, the facts behind it, even documents. I haven't seen any of those. I'm trying to do my best job as a scientist. And I believe, if you ask me, I believe it's arrogant for us to think that we are alone, that we are the smartest that ever lived, the smartest species since the Big Bang. And I think we will soon get a reality check on that, either from AI that becomes comparable to the human brain as we speak. And within years, we will not be the most intelligent entities on Earth, irrespective of extraterrestrials, but that would give us sort of a sense of modesty. And I think in the distant future, if we find a neighbor that is far more advanced than we are, that has access to technologies that we do not understand, that experience will be similar to Moses in the biblical story, seeing the burning bush that was never consumed. And, if obviously you can find online nowadays gadgets that would impress Moses as much as he was impressed to believe in a superhuman entity that he called God. But even for us, if we bring technologies that we will use 100 years from now, if we were to witness them now, we would be at awe, a religious awe, and we might start to believe in a superhuman entity. And for me, this is, the sense of awe that was lost when Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead. And, after that, that was in 1882. After that, we had the age of science and technology that manifests hubris, human arrogance. And it's about time for us to develop a new sense of modesty. And I think that sense will be brought by a package from a neighbor that we would find in our backyard.
You've said previously, I'm struck by the religious references you've made there, and you've said previously you're not religious, but that you're struck by the order we find in the universe, by the regularity, by the existence of rules of nature. And you've said you are in awe of how the laws of nature we find here on Earth seem to apply all the way out to the edge of the universe. And that is remarkable. Does such order ever make you wonder not whether there's a creator, be that a god, or maybe it's just a highly technological, incredibly advanced alien civilization?
Yeah, in fact, I get this sense of awe, especially after visiting the rooms of my daughters in the morning. I mean, they are a mess. The natural state is chaos, okay? And nevertheless, if you look at the universe, it's very organized. The laws we find on Earth apply everywhere. Actually, the universe started from the simplest possible set of initial conditions. It was nearly uniform, and the complexity that we find today was a result of gravity pulling together matter. Now, the fundamental question that I would actually ask on the first date with an extraterrestrial is, what happened before the Big Bang? Because at the moment, we don't have a theory that predicts that. You need to marry quantum mechanics with gravity in order to figure it out. And we just don't have a predictive theory that tells us that. And in my mind, once we get to the point where we have a theory of quantum gravity, I can imagine the possibility of our engineers, quantum gravity engineers, creating a baby universe in the laboratory. And now the question is, did our universe start this way? Is it possible that our universe was created by some scientist or engineer in a white lab coat? And you might call it that entity God, but it may well be a natural product of understanding how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity. Now, if you make such a universe, you will make it in the simplest possible way. You will start with uniform initial conditions, a universe that has zero energy, which is our universe, because the expansion energy of the universe is exactly balanced by the gravitational binding energy of the universe. So it has zero energy. It's a very simple initial state. And that would be the kind of state that if I wanted to create in the laboratory, I would make it. And then let gravity take its part and eventually create complexity. But it all started from a very simple initial state. And, an advanced technological civilization that can create a baby universe in the laboratory or can create life in the laboratory would have all the qualities that we ascribed to traditional religious thinking about God. And so to me, there is a way of bringing together science and religion by actually, through the method of finding a much more advanced level of science that can create